Washington. I'm an executive recruiter and I live in Portland, Oregon. Yeah, so my background as an executive recruiter is focused on helping companies and leaders identify, hire, and integrate leaders into their business. And when you do that, I started to realize that there's a science behind it. How do we make sure we have the best information to make well-informed decisions? And so as I began to ask myself that question of what are the right questions to ask, what are the right measures to use, how do we really know that we have the right person, I started to realize that there was a whole nother field that I had yet to explore in the area of industrial and organizational psychology. And that was my first introduction into the field and thinking about how do I become better informed as an executive recruiter and be equipped with the right tools to be the best at it. Yeah, in my view, organizational culture is important because every culture has its own unique way of, number one, doing things and how work gets achieved. Number two, how you build relationships and work with others. And number three, what you stand for. You know, what is your vision, your mission as an organization? So those are really three elements of why it is important. And anytime you are hiring or promoting individuals in your culture, you have to have those three things in mind and into consideration. And this is where the science comes in IO psychology, understanding what are the behaviors that make people successful in my culture or in a culture, and have those individuals demonstrated those behaviors, or do they have the potential to demonstrate those behaviors with good coaching, leadership, and direction? Let me give you an example of organizational culture and one that works well. And the name of the organization, who I have a lot of respect for, is called Superfeet. And Scott Donor, the current board chairman, came into the organization on the heels of the company not making the right decisions. Cash flow wasn't where he wanted it to be, didn't have the right partners to help build the business. And through focus, time, and attention, and knowing what he wanted to build, fast forward 25 years later, and his culture is one of the top best places to work by Outside Magazine. And Outside Magazine goes out and they send out an independent survey to employees in these organizations, and they can answer it objectively. And for the last several years, they've come back as one of the best places to work. And I think what has made it so special is, number one, he's pretty visible as a board chairman and at the time CEO, but he leads with people. He leads with people. He cares about people. He holds people accountable. And those things have transformed that culture to where, number one, people want to come to work and give 110% every day. Number two, they're going to stay. They don't want to leave. And I had the privilege when working on a project with him to be in that culture for 6 months as a consultant and felt very much a part of the family, felt very much a part of the organizational culture. And I could see from my own eyes how he had built a sustainable, living and breathing culture that till this day does a wonderful job of bringing the people in, keeping the people, and having them reach and achieve their full potential. So we had a very unique and wonderful opportunity to investigate within the public transportation industry why transit systems were hiring fewer people of color into the seat of the CEO. Fascinating study, because the industry in and of itself had been going through a transformation of starting to realize that a lot of CEOs were retiring. There had been a lack of succession management. And frankly, because of the lack of succession management, they hadn't been able to build up their pool of potential and future leaders. Well, through our research, we were able to identify some of the trends and frankly opportunities for the industry to better identify leaders for executive searches. We're able to identify opportunities for them to develop existing leaders in their organization. So when that seat of the CEO would open up, there would be a ready available pool for them to consider. It was a study that took 2 years, and we investigated both in the industry through talking to existing CEOs, their number two, which is considered the deputy or the COO. We also looked outside at private sector to understand what were some of the practices that they were doing to make sure that there was a diverse slate of candidates anytime the seat of the CEO opened up and they went external to look for those candidates. Yeah, so I've had the wonderful opportunity to work in a variety of different industries. I talked just a moment ago about the public sector. In the private sector, things are different because they're operating on a profit and loss. They're extremely consumer centric. And when you look at the private sector and the way they think about culture, culture is everything to them. And if you ask a CEO what matters most of them will tell you is culture. Because once you can design the right culture that facilitates high performing engagement, which has an impact on retention, you've got the right recipe. But what I've learned in the private sector, not often is there a critical focus on diversity. And I think what's been happening lately is a lot of these organizations are starting to realize, and it's starting to get some pressure to some degree around, hey, your consumer is diverse. Why doesn't the makeup of your organization and your leadership team reflect your consumer? And so organizations are now starting to say, hey, look, we know there's value in having a diverse culture, but we know there's even greater value if we can align with our consumer, the demographics of our consumer, who are in fact diverse, people of color, gender, etc. We need to make sure that our culture and our organization reflects that all the way from the leadership down into the individual contributor in the organization. Yes, it's a great question. Selection and culture and diversity are interrelated and are really key components when you're looking to make selection decisions related to diversity. Let me give you an example. Using competencies. We talk about this in my most recent book that came out, Competencies at Work, Providing a Common Language for Talent Management. When you use competencies in selection, competencies have no prejudice, for the lack of a better word, against an individual. And so if you have the right selection system in place that is aligned with your culture and how your culture operates and how people make decisions, how are people successful in culture, then hiring for diversity becomes a natural, okay? You don't have to have the emphasis on it. And what has been found in a lot of studies is that when you have an objective selection system that is aligned with the behaviors of the culture, then when you put forth a diverse slate of candidates, the best candidate will naturally rise to the occasion and be selected. And oftentimes, that's a candidate that is diverse, people of color or gender. I'll say in the work that I've done, and I've had the ability, the opportunity to work across many industries and work for hundreds of companies. And not every organization has an objective selection system. Not every organization has defined specifically what it means to be successful in their company and have it documented. And as a result, this is why organizations are having a hard time with diversity. And at times when you don't have objectivity, then that plays a factor in the system not being fair with a diverse slate of candidates. So competency modeling, why it is important, is you got to begin with the end in mind. And competencies make up and describe patterns of behaviors that we display in ourselves. And when organizations use competency modeling to define success and the outcomes associated with success in a role, then you're able to have better recruitment and selection. You're able to have better management of performance. You're better able to train and develop against those competencies. And as a result, you're going to be in a much better place to have a high performing organization when those things blend together. Yes, one example of how competency modeling has been used in an organization. We worked with an organization that was going through a transformational phase. They were wanting to grow from being a $50 million business to a $500 million business. And to do that, they knew they needed to bring in a leader who would help transform and transcend the organization from where it existed today. And we started this whole project. It was an executive search project. But we started this project with designing a competency model for the selection of the right and new CEO. And designing that competency model, we gathered the stakeholders. This included the board chairman. It included the vice president of people, value, and culture. It included the existing incumbent who was leaving to retire. And it included some of the new leader coming in, some of his or her direct reports. And so the competency modeling defined a set of 6 core competencies that were going to be indicative of effective performance in the role, and was going to be able to allow us, number one, to have an effective search process. And then second, number two was going to allow the organization to design good structured interviewing around the candidates coming in to interview. And then it allowed the organization to put together a very comprehensive onboarding and integration plan for the new person coming in, because they had clearly defined, using competency modeling, what success looked like in the job and what were the outcomes they wanted to see. Fast forward 3 years later, the organization has had 25% growth year over year. They're on pace to hit their goals and objective, which was a 10-year plan to get to $500 million. And the CEO is doing quite well. And I think what we contribute success to was we started with determining what success looked like before we did any part of the project.